Hit these together. This evening's Dharma talk is titled, and I have an idea I'm trying to convey, so I start out with this kind of a title. And I'm kind of always talking about the same thing anyway. I'm sure you've noticed that. But it's a non-tracking awareness. So it's the nature of awareness is it's very versatile. A difficult thing to convey, since we're always trying to be aware of this or be aware of that or follow this or trace this down and see what's happening here, or get more of this, get less. We're always going back and forth, manipulating our situation in some way. And the sitting practice of meditation actually allows you to see the way the mind constantly is doing it. It's like we're in a very simple level where we're not really okay with anything that's happening. We always want something this, or a little bit more of that, or want to turn it slightly, or move it this way. It's basically shows up as impatience. It can show up as wanting to reject what's happening. It can show up as wanting more of what's happening. It can show up so many different ways. But to not particularly track anything leaves the self-centered mind, the ego mind, kind of without a support, and it doesn't particularly care for that. But I think this is something that if you understand the concept that I'm endeavoring to convey by that title, non-tracking. So there's no, you could say, take it a little further and say, we're not leaving any tracks. You don't know exactly where you're going. So it can show up as just being open, but it's not the kind of openness where you feel like you're being open. If you feel like you're being open, you are not. You can't get a credential for being open. So you may have to actually see the way the mind keeps tracking everything in order to get very, very familiar with the way we keep abandoning what is for something else, all the time, on and on. One of the reasons that we study the material, study the concepts of the men coming down to us through 2,500 years, centuries, through different teachers, different lineages, different ways of manifesting, different ways of explaining what people see and how they understand the Buddha's Dharma, awakened truth. Is not so much so that we can be given a solution, but rather so that we can exercise our conceptual mind in such a way that we're coming conceptually closer and closer to a fundamental realization, understanding of what this situation is, which is not separate. It's not separate. It's very simple. It's in your face. It's in your face right now. If you realize it, the work is over. It's that simple. If you realize that there isn't anything else to do, the feeling, the sense, the understanding that isn't any, that nothing is separate, it doesn't mean that you have some kind of a woo-woo feeling about it. May not have any feeling about it. May not have that kind of a dimension for you. It could have, just out of contrast, it might initially, but then since nothing lasts, any kind of contrast and any kind of experience fades. Insight into what this is, realization of what this is, doesn't go anywhere. Doesn't get better, doesn't get worse, doesn't doesn't get dimmer, doesn't get brighter, doesn't do anything. So therefore, if that situation dawns on you, sorry to use that kind of a metaphor because dawn doesn't last. Of course, I understand that no, I'm not going to go there. That's corny humor. See, I just avoided that. I saved you talking about Dawn dish soap. Go ahead.
Does realize mean the same thing as recognize?
I think so. But once you recognize it, you don't have to continue to recognize it. If you're continuing to recognize it, then trying to regurgitate it or reemphasize it or return to it over and over and over again, then it's still there's still a path quality going on. There's not it's not fruition. Fruition is there isn't anything else. And another way that teachers often say this is there's really no goal. There's really no result. There's no conclusion. So when I use that particular example of saying non-tracking, that's if you can just consider that or contemplate that idea of by looking at what tracking is and seeing that it's not that, but you actually can't find the opposite of that because it's also the same as that. Did I just say that? Very difficult to point two directions at the same time. But that's what needs to be done on some level. We need to actually look at what shows up with no addition, no subtraction, no division, no math at all, and just observe what arises. It seems to take a lot of time to do that, a lot of dedication to it. And so for one person, there might be a lot of witnessing how we keep going after this tracking. We're going after this, we want that, we don't want this, we want more of that, but now we're getting too much of that. Constantly negotiating with our mind about what we'll do, what we won't do, and so on. And then, but someone else, on the other hand, on the same hand, might be just completely relaxed into it, might not trust that. When I say trust it, I mean give it the benefit of the doubt. There it is. Don't adjust. Don't move. Don't conclude. Don't exclude. Do nothing. This is why when in ancient times, when Buddhism showed up in ancient China, the Taoist masters there looked at that and thought, well, that's Taoism. There was not a big conflict. I'm not saying there weren't some individuals that had some conflicts, but basically it's just watch what moves. No math, no adding, subtracting, dividing. This doesn't mean that something wouldn't happen that you wouldn't object to and say, that's not happening. Take that away or take it in the other room or stop it. But it would come out of awareness. It would come out of measureless panoramic awareness where there's no self. I'm not saying that if you met a person who is functioning this way, that they wouldn't look like they're just as self-centered as everyone else. They might.
Does the non-tracking awareness observe the tracking awareness?
The non-tracking awareness isn't actually awareness. It's not separate. So awareness, there's still some quality of some aspect of awareness coming together to be able to be aware of that, or not aware of this, or someone who is assuming that their awareness is getting more and more expansive. Yeah. We've got a Pisces here and a Pisces there. Which fish? You have a burning question? Go ahead.
Is there an example in our own practice or our life where we can recognize the awareness that it feels like you're trying to point to?
Yeah, right. When you're looking at in your sitting practice or in your post meditation everyday life, when you're looking at something that's very difficult and challenging that you are trying to get rid of, or something difficult and challenging that you're trying to evaluate why it's happening, or the same thing where you're doing anything with it at all, then that's the leading edge of seeing what non-tracking is. You have to see the tracking, because the reason it shows up so challenging is that we can't hardly help but think that you have to get rid of something or change something or be different. And it's really is done with the awareness and the singularity of the awareness of being my awareness about that or my awareness about this. That's what will eventually go away. When I say go away, it will just stop to get any fuel because it's no longer agreed with or objected to or distracted from passion, aggression, and ignorance. More?
What's the difference between realization of the fundamental situation versus like relative realization? Or why doesn't it fade away?
Because it doesn't appear. Good question. Relative situations both appear and disappear. Like we wake up and then we go back to sleep. And there's all kinds of polarities that are happening that we are completely magnetized by or seduced by all over the place. And so we think that we're here and things are happening and things occur. Some things get larger and some things get small. Sometimes things go away and some things come back. It's like so convincing. Have you noticed? What's the other part of the question?
I guess I'm just more curious about that kind of realization. So are you realizing something or what are you realizing?
Yeah, you're not really realizing something. The realization is fundamental. So it's not separate from anything. So there's no realizer. There's nothing realized. It's sometimes some traditions called a threefold purity. So it's completely pure. There's sometimes used in terms of generosity, no gift, no giver, no receiver, or no gift, no giver, no giving. There's no dynamic that creates an imaginary past and future or success and failure. It's just fundamentally pure from the beginning. Suzanne?
Is non-tracking awareness space?
That would be a metaphor for it. Nothing in particular. But in order to approach that, it seems to be necessary to see the way we keep tracking things. Either track something or keeping track of something, watching the tracks of something, remembering something, tracks. Have you got a better Dharma talk title for me? I can use all the help I can get. I'm all alone up here. Yes, thanks.
You said if you realize that the work is over,
I do.
does that mean we have to work at realization?
Seems like it. You have to put energy and effort into it. You have to put effort into it to get to the situation where you, like what we do here is sit down, hold still, hold everything still that you can and watch what continues to tumble or has some kind of a forward movement or a backward movement or some kind of adjustments happening. It could be just rattling around. It could be things showing up that by moving around, you've been able to cover them up. But when you sit down and hold still, get to know yourself pretty well. Go ahead.
If there's no progress on the path and it doesn't seem like we have to put in 100 hours and then we'll be realized, it doesn't seem like a strong correlation in that way, then what is the work doing?
paraphrase your question. I understand you. I want you to say it again in a different way.
Is realization dependently arisen?
So there are aspects to that, the relative aspects that lead that way. There are stages on the path and so on, which are in some teachers and teachings emphasize that. I don't do that. But the actual realization is, it doesn't abandon that. It includes dependent origination, but it's not at the mercy of it. So that's like the old story of Yakuto's fox, where he was asked by the teacher, does the awakened person, have they transcended karma? And I guess it was Yakuto said, yeah, probably, tentatively. He said, yeah. And then he was just a teaching device. He was condemned to what, was it 300 or 600 lifetimes as a fox? Talking to you.
Let's look at your monk that would know.
Which monk would know?
The smart one.
The smart one. So Kozan, you've been nominated to be the smart monk.
Could be 3, could be 500.
3,500?
I don't know, 3 or 500 or something.
Oh, okay. So it's a metaphor for teaching. Probably it was only 15 or 20. So, but it's the idea that anytime you come to conclusion about anything, you just grabbed onto the merry-go-round, the Ferris wheel, the tilt-a-whirl, or whatever, the spinning nature of samsara and the spinning nature of your mind. So you don't have to do anything. But this doesn't mean you go the other direction with it and make some kind of insistence that I'm not going to do anything. I'm just not going to do anything. So this is why it seems to be important to find out the nature of movement itself, because movement isn't just the opposite of stillness. Go ahead.
You talked about working towards it. You said we have to put energy into it.
Yeah.
What are we putting energy into?
Get to the cushion, sit down, hold still. We have a teaching, learning situation here that's set up, and participate in the forums as they're presented, as I did for many, many years under the guidance of my teacher, mainly the first teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, and that whole structure, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. You just practice and study and practice and study. More?
Do we not have to make any adjustments post-meditation?
There could be some, but it should come out, I say should, could come out of just your awareness of the situation. You might find yourself making some kind of adjustment, but don't set up standards. Don't set up a standard whereby I did this, and so I'm just going to keep doing that. That seems to work really well. So that's what could that be called? Ignorance? No conclusion. But this doesn't mean you might not do something out of the situation the way you see it. You do this the next time the same situation happens, and you don't respond to that. You might respond in a different way. More?
Should we experiment with ourselves?
This is a pretty big experiment right here. Probably bit off more than you could chew already. Are you sewing a robe? Too bad. Or too good. So that's why we do these. That's why these forums are here. It's not because there's some kind of a holy thing where we're all bowing to the Buddha and worshiping somebody. This is empty of what you think it is, and that may be more difficult than it just being empty of not being particularly believable. Further questions? Yes.
What's the relationship between seeing contrast and realization?
If you're seeing if I understand your question, if you're seeing the contrast, then if you don't conclude anything about it, and if you don't exclude anything about it, if you do nothing with it other than see it, then probably isn't anything else to do. It feels like you're depersonalizing things. The path quality of it is depersonalizing, but much to our surprise, it becomes more and more and more personal. So much so that you're responsible for how everybody feels. And if you're around anybody who's having intense emotions and feelings, you're not like a stone or a rock. But they may not be able to see anything that's happening with you at all. Further questions? Shoka.
How can someone who awakens look more self-centered?
Because they're they basically are a blank in a relative sense, one way of saying it, and they're easy to project onto them. So you project onto them, so it's your projection of what's happening with them. If you won't see who you're talking to unless you awaken. You won't even know if someone's awake unless you awaken. So you follow that? There's more questions there. Please let me have them. I mean, let's have fun.
If everyone is basically awake, then
Yes. Keep going.
how can
Everyone's basically awake. Nothing sleeps anywhere. Nothing is asleep anywhere. Got your work cut out for you. Is that what they say? Who do they say that to? Who does cutting? Who cuts things? Which job is it that cuts? You have your work cut out for you. Is there some particular
Seamstress.
seamster?
Seamstress.
Oh, seamstress. Emphasis on the stress. Yeah. Yeah. I think Bosker's sewing right now. He's a seamster.
He's stressed.
He's stressed.
My stitches, it's more like a hamster.
Further about that? Good one. Just take it further. What more do you want to know?
it seems I don't know how to ask. I can see it, but I can't.
I understand. Just keep looking at it. Yes.
Question from Don in Virginia.
Yes, Don.
Is there no movie if there is no projection?
I think I follow what you're saying and I follow your question there, but I would say that's not really certain. There's a lot of the whole idea of projection is very conceptual. The whole idea of movie is very conceptual. So to take one and say, if we stop this, will that stop? So there's a little, what we're doing is we're purchasing some of the territory of dependent origination to see if we can't squeeze out some enlightenment there. Not going to happen. Oh yeah, it'll happen, but it won't last because it's derived from from an understanding of pratitya samutpada or dependent origination. But you can't enlist that in your. I mean, you can enlist it, but then you'll just get rich, or you'll get poor. Same thing.
you say that someone who's awake is easy to project onto. Is the projection more than the appearance?
Yeah, there isn't any particular, the appearance is in the, as they say, in the eye of the beholder. You're seeing that and you think you see something a certain way. So it's called a projection, yes.
Can the way that we're self-centered cause someone else to show up a particular way around us?
Sure. It's called a relationship. You knew that, didn't you?
I have a question.
You don't want to go that direction. I understand. That's all right. No problem. Go ahead, ask me the question.
So is there like two levels of the projection?
Be more specific, please.
Like the initial self-centeredness causing someone to show up a certain way, and then what we think about that?
No, it's too complicated. Keep coming. Well, that didn't evoke a more complicated question. Well, that's good. Did you use that?
Do we project onto ourselves?
Yes. We do. We think we are somebody. It's astonishing, isn't it? We actually, if you look in the mirror, you'll actually start to lecture yourself. You notice that? Of course, I don't do that. It's not about stopping or starting or changing anything. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to be somebody else. You get to actually be whatever this came into this life. That's who you are. It's just that if you don't accept or reject or do anything with it, then the whole manifestation itself becomes transparent. Yes.
In the past, you've talked about the 4 aspects of the 7th consciousness, I think, and they seem to be around a projection of a self. I'm wondering how that self-consciousness or identity consciousness continues to function or not after realization.
So because of karma, because we're born, we come in and we operate in terms of cause and effect, and we live here, and we hear the Buddhist teachings, and it resonates with us on some level. We begin to train our mind, and then we begin to see that including those 4, the sense of self-reference and pride of self and self-love, and what's the third one?
4th one.
Are you correcting me? I know how to count. Yes, the 4th one. Thank you. Delusion of self. So they may be, since we're here and we have our sense consciousnesses. So it may show up, it may not, but it's when it shows up, it just seemed to be unreal. So when pride of self shows up, we see it, but it doesn't get activated. It doesn't get to jump in the saddle. It's still there, but it really can't ride. You still see it. It may tug at you and want, come on, present me. I'm here. I have my crown on and I'm all ready and I'm bright and shiny and brush my teeth and, come on, introduce me to everybody. I'm wonderful. Or else go the other way, which we've talked about before, is the opposite end of pride is shame. Thinking that we're terrible. We forgot to brush our teeth. Our hair, we forgot to wash our hair, or the other kind, we made a mistake. Another way of strengthening that self is I can't seem to do this. I just can't seem to get anything right.
If the self is seen to be unreal, I'm wondering if, because of dependent origination, is there always going to be an appearance or still that karmic manifestation of identity?
Probably. But there's no guarantee of success or failure or existence or non-existence. All the polarity situation just collapses. And then you have whatever's here, and you see that that whatever this is, whatever you are, whatever anyone is here, you're not separate from anything. You're not a separate, there's a separation, but the fundamental nature is not separate. Therefore, you're no longer aligned with the materialistic approach of success and failure, right and wrong, up and down, back and forth. You're not interested in controlling anything. Yet, on the other hand, you have a tremendous amount of control because there's no agenda. So therefore, anything that needs your help, you can help. It's almost, if not totally invisible, it's almost invisible. And if something needs to be stopped, you can stop it. If something needs to be blessed, you can bless it. More.
Realization is not the opposite of identity.
No, it is identity. It's not two. It's Advaita. Dvaita is two. Advaita is not two. So it's the simplest way of putting it. And you can see how completely seductive the two-ness is. Everything looks like something else. Everything looks like that's over there, or I don't have that. I used to have that, but now I don't. If I could only get that, if I could only, whatever it may be, if I could only stop my temper, or if I could only fulfill my desire of becoming a great, well-known reptilian. You didn't think I knew about that, did you? Yes.
Is there negativity an indication that we have work to do?
Is the negativity? If the negativity is without particularly naming it or doing anything with it, or dividing it, separating it out as something that shouldn't be there, then you may have some work to do. You may not.
If we attach a story to that, is that doing something with the negativity?
Yeah, anytime you have any kind of a story. Now, if it attaches itself, then just watch it. I mean, if you see negativity arise, and then you notice there's a group of things, barnacles, attaching themselves to the original negativity, just observe. No surgery. No, don't remove anything. Sometimes, in some ways, depending on where one is, you could say, at on the path, this could show up as humility. You're no longer interested in polishing yourself up so you look better. And if somebody thinks you're not doing so well, you don't accept it, reject it, or look away. Other questions? Michael?
Does realization last?
Does it last? The whole idea of duration is not part of that. So it doesn't have to last because it's not separate from anything. So it's not a separate state of mind like, happiness or sadness. It's not a state of mind. It's not separate from anything. So it can show up as anger. It can show up as sadness. It can show up as parliamentary procedure. It doesn't have a quality that is you can separate out, although it's been taught that way a lot. More? I see you. Adam.
Can you speak a little bit about trusting ourselves and how that kind of plays into our practice?
So just the word trust is can be seen a lot of different ways. If there's one kind of trust where you look at something and you just trust it, and if you the kind of trust that's from it and let it wander around in circles and bump into things and so on. So trusting yourself would be the way I say this. And it might sound a little corny or something in a way, but it's not about trusting It's not about believing the thoughts or disbelieving the thoughts or ignoring the thoughts that arise in your mind stream. It is about trusting the space in which those things occur. You are not separate from the space. The very nature of wisdom is like space. Yet it's not space, but it's like that, a metaphor. So whatever is happening, anything that's happening in the mind, trust the space in which that occurs. So if you're having strong negativity, just look at the space that the negativity is arising in. That's trustworthy. But the thoughts of whatever's arising in the space about I should do this, I shouldn't do that, I better do this, I shouldn't have done that, they shouldn't be doing that. It might be relatively true, but it could also be relatively untrue. And it seems that there is a closer understanding of what it actually is if you're just looking at the space in which it occurs. More?
Question from Thomas in Germany. He asks, when I am constantly worried, this seems to me an evidence for being a separate self. If this is an illusion, who is having this feeling?
I don't know. Find out. Spend a lot of time. I don't know how much time you spend on the cushion, or wall gazing, however you want to say it. Find out. But that's a very good question to just simplify it instead of continuing to ask the question. Ask the question, then sit down for 3 or 4 hours and look at that, what that is.
Another question from Dawn in Virginia.
Okay.
When you refer to agenda, do you mean the motivation to promote the sense of self?
Could be. We also have an agenda to practice every day, or if we're living in the monastery, then we might be involved in the structure of the monastery. So we might have agreed to just at 6:45 in the morning to do the hit the Hanan and bell for the different sequences for 15 minutes before the morning sitting starts. So that's kind of an agenda about things. So we're not trying to do away with that. It's just to look at the intention around any kind of agenda about something. Look at the intention. And so I'm not saying analyze that and do away with it or stop doing it. You don't have to stop or start doing anything. Just be aware of what your personal, if you're operating out of paranoia, if you're operating out of loss or some kind of grasping. You don't have to improve. Training the mind is simply put, is to sit down, hold very still, and see the way the mind is untrained. In other words, it's chaotic, or it's coming this way, going that way, liking this, not liking that. If you do it enough, eventually all the negativity that you've been avoiding starts to seep through the cheesecloth. Yes?
Why do emotions and feelings feel so real?
Pardon me?
Why do emotions and feelings feel so real?
Well, don't do too much with why question, because you can elaborate quite a bit, but
What are
just let me respond this way. Okay, so there's something about the way in which we receive things that causes it to show up in a way that it's substantial. But one of the ways you can help, you can relate with that is compare. Well, you can use several things. You can use the nightmare you had that seemed so real. You could have someone across the room that is upset with you because you let them down or didn't keep an appointment or something. Seems so real. You're feeling being on the spot, or maybe being defensive, or they just don't understand, or all the things that can come up there. But also seeing a really intense kind of a play or a movie or something. It seems, and where if the play is, if it's a good play, and the people are very good at portraying feelings, emotions, or acting, you can be drawn right into that, and yet you know it's unreal, but they seem so real. So that's a very good way to to experience how the emotions work is in that kind of a thing. That's a good metaphor. The one I use quite often is to use that metaphor of your life as like being on a stage, and to back off and get into the first row, get a little bit of what you'd call objectivity about it. Don't leave the theater, but watch the different parts that your emotions and feelings play in your life. Nothing lasts. I mean, and things are so incredibly impermanent. Just like what happened April the 12th of 2018. What was going on that day with you? Anything? I don't know. Unless something happened, even if it was our birthday, sometimes we can't. Did I have a cake? Anybody make a cake for me? Sometimes we can't, or sometimes we can remember just a little bit, and sometimes what we remember isn't what actually happened. I run into that all the time. Welcome. Oscar.
What does the awareness of an enlightened person track?
What do they lack?
Track. What do they track? What does it
track? Not much. The tracking all comes from anything that's whatever the situation is. They track. If I'm sitting here tracking something, or you're sitting there tracking something, probably not that dissimilar. But in the case in which I'm talking about or endeavoring to get you to look at is just watch the way you track. Because by doing that, if you can do that without adding to it, without subtracting from it, in other words, passion or aggression or ignoring it or trying to stop it or shut it off, eventually you'll see that the tracking might be going on, but there's no one there. There's no tracker. Just a way of talking about it. Yes.
I'm not tracking what you're saying. It feels like I'm distracted or ignoring that.
Mhm.
So how?
That's awareness, though. But what I'm hearing you say, you're saying something that's like has a negative connotation. It feels like I'm distracted or being. Is that what you're saying? And I'm saying that's awareness of your distraction, and that's what we're trying to see. As meditators, you're not trying to see how enlightened you are. You're trying to see how crazy you are, how distracted you are. You need to see the distraction. So the very thing you're acknowledging there, that's it. That's what I'm talking about. That's the path. Ground, path, and fruition. The ground is a suffering or discontent or uneasiness or all the other kinds of suffering that human beings go through. And the path is, I'm going to find out what this is. I'm going to look at this right as it is and see if I can see what this fundamentally is. Suffering. And then the realization is that the suffering or the distraction may be there, but there's no one who's distracted. It's not a conclusion. If it's a conclusion, then we're back down on still running around in circles trying to, write a book about our life. Yes.
When you talk about things in the sense of ground, path, and fruition, is path the only action we have to take?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So when you say the path is just to look at the negativity or the distraction,
Awareness.
we don't have to do anything beyond that?
Well, you might have to. Other people get a pass, but not you. So it varies. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it varies. But if you're doing it with your awareness rather than with some kind of a program that either I'm telling you or someone else is telling you, you're reading a book. But if you sit down, hold still, and spend a lot of time just watching what your mind does, you'll begin to understand what you need to do and what you don't need to do. I mean, then you could come and ask me about it, or sometimes, and I might say, I don't know. I think you're going to have to work with that yourself. Or I might say, I'm just giving you an example. I'm probably not going to say this to you. I'm just giving you a strong example. I've told some people to stop meditating based on what I hear they're going through. Not many. And I don't say forever. I'm saying stop sitting for a while. And someone else, I might have them do a different kind of practice, do a mantra practice, or do. And I'm just rattling a few off here because it could be anything. I might have them close their eyes and they're sitting,
when we're endeavoring to work with the student teacher situation and something might be showing up that is just kind of spontaneously changing on its own, should we bring that to the teacher's attention?
Not necessarily, not as a protocol. I mean, you might, but there's no agenda. There's no, it's the whole area of forms is very interesting because one of the teachings is don't set up standards. But that actually, if you understand that there are forms are meant to help you with your awareness. They're not things so that you can just obey and be a perfect, student or something. The forms are there so that by going through those forms, you can begin to see how the awareness is working. There isn't anything with this moment, past and future extra. We just reinvent it constantly because we want a security blanket on both sides. What we can remember and that other thing, what we get to remember pretty soon. Yes.
What are memories?
I don't know what it looks like to you.
Attachment.
It's not bad. What are they attached to? Was that funny? Oh. Is it because what he said, or was I funny or was he funny?
It was just the way you smile.
Oh, yeah, that was funny. Yes.
Is that distractedness, is that non-tracking awareness?
If you see that what's happening and you don't do anything with it, don't correct the distraction. Yeah, then that's a good one. It's another way of saying don't fix yourself. Don't your very negativity that you would like to get rid of or stop or shove out the door or something. This is the Buddha didn't do that. As far as we know, he actually lived his life, lived his suffering in spite of as the story goes, in spite of the fact that his dad wanted him to stay in the palace. He went out into the woods and looked at it. So that's all we're doing. In a sense, we're doing our version of what the Buddha did. Yes.
So does non-tracking awareness see what happens but doesn't track it?
Yeah, it sees what happens is it sees, to put it literally or pictorially, there's no tracker. The tracking is happening, but the tracking is happening out of the situation. It's just situational, just like situation ethics. Instead of having ethical rules that you follow, that you never waver from those, no matter what happens, they're situational. Sometimes you may have to do this, and another time that one thing, and another time you may not. If you're not using rules to make sure you're safe and don't make any mistakes. Instead, you're using those as guidelines so you can live a sane, uplifted life that supports all beings and supports everyone as much as possible. It's difficult to do in the human realm because there's so much desire and there's so much grasping in it. We want something else. Yes.
Is non-tracking awareness ignorance?
It could be for a while. Quite a long time, actually. Yes.
Is ignorance something we add on to what we're saying?
Well, looking at and calling it ignorance, then that's an add-on. The actual ignorance can show up lots of different ways. And it's not so much of a thing showing up until we call it or name it or relate to it that that's what that is. We're ignoring or turning away or shutting off or distracting ourselves into something else. Sokuzan.
Is motivation an imputation?
So I think it's a relative situation that we become motivated around wanting to do this or to do that. So I think there's something like that happening. Like, just like receiving precepts. I mean, it's a very artificial kind of thing, but it seems necessary to do that so that we can have some kind of a reminder of what we're here to do. If in fact this is some approach that you wish to take with your life, to be with all things, to save all beings, to put others before yourself. Not easy to do that. So there's that quality, you're actually going to do this. Is that what you're asking me about? Or is there some other dimension to that?
I think I'm getting at is tying an action to a motivation making up a story, or is there some legitimacy to?
Yeah, it's always legitimate. The issue is we're suspicious and we're paranoid about making a mistake. So, and that of course creates someone who could be right or wrong. It's an endless, it's not really endless. More questions? Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our chant box. I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes in the hallway. We appreciate and depend on your generosity to help keep these teachings and teacher alive. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji Ho San Shi Shi Fu Shi Son Bu Sam Ho Ko Sa Ho Ko Ja. The 10 directions of the three worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect SokukoJi Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.